one of the problems I'm working on is that a lot of our offspring corms are very small, about 3/8 of an inch in diameter. I want to carefully plant them in soil that has everything they might need to grow larger. How do we accomplish that? Victor, do you want to start, and then I'll also add on?
So basically, adding size to the corms, that is the underlying question in there, right?
Yeah.
So this is done in the propagation phase, basically in the after the flowering part. My question for this farmer would be as well if it's outdoor or indoor, because if it's outdoor, there is multiple, let's say, issues that can be as well. There can be a soil issue as well. If your soil doesn't contain the nutrients that are necessary for saffron, of course, you can add them with the fertilizer and the nutrients you'll be adding. But if you have an incorrect soil, let's say maybe the salinity or the acidity of the soil is too high, that can lead into the let's say the growing phase of the saffron bulb as well, so it doesn't grow as much as it would be, because we also for the indoor part we suggest only bulbs with 20 grams or higher, because it's more economically viable. But there can be issue of soil or you not adding the right fertilizer at the moment, because also in the propagation phase there is a cycle in a way that you use a bit of a different nutrient in the beginning and in the end as well, also as the leaf grows and also throughout the process. So it will need, so you can have a mismatch in this, you can provide the wrong nutrients at the wrong time, so this can be an issue as well. I'll let you continue on this as well if you maybe have something to add.
Yeah, it's a great foundation. Yeah, I'd say while there isn't a whole lot of literature on offspring corm, I should say nursery corm propagation. So, in other words, using very small corms, let's say under 5 grams, to produce larger offspring corms over the course of, let's say, 2, 3 years, even. We do have some really nice anecdotal data from, I know, growers in Vermont that have had success here in the United States, all the way to some of my colleagues who are in the research field that kind of have this, I'd say, expert consensus along with me, which is that even if you have very, very small offspring corms, if you set up a corm nursery plot, let's say, where you basically put the corms in a certain density, certain depth, you might be able to increase their size after, let's say, 2 years. Now, the reason why is a couple fold. One, corm density plays a huge role in the amount of nutrients per corm available. And generally speaking, a lower corm density will help lead to larger offspring corms. Of course, there will be diminishing returns, whereby if you have too much spacing between corms, you're now just wasting space on your farm. On the opposite side of the spectrum, when there's too much crowding, it's difficult for each corm to get enough nutrients to grow larger. And aside from that, you also increase the potential for things like corm rot and other, let's say, fungal diseases, and of course, things like mites to go ahead and spread between corms. And so that's also can be an issue of diminishing returns, where you have too much on the opposite side and it leads to poor outcomes. Last but not least, when it comes to corm depth, generally speaking, around 6 inches into the soil will be your general rule of thumb recommendation. But if you go lower than that, actually, you can essentially stimulate the corm to, focus more, let's say, on offspring corm development. Whereas if you go a little bit higher, you might actually get a little bit better, let's say, percent yield across the board for all the corms you plant. So these are two major things to consider. And the last thing I'll just plug in there is the reason why we do 2 years actually versus like 1 year is because that cycle of having, let's say, the corm deep enough in the ground where every year it comes up by, just a little bit, around an inch or two in the soil, is if you start very deep and it comes up just a little bit more, it's still not at a very high enough depth where it's going to be, let's say, focusing more of its energy on flowering, which is more of an incidental process, evolutionarily speaking, for saffron, because it is self-propagated, so it's a sterile crop. So there are a lot of fun things to play around with. And so for this grower in particular, other than what Victor said, I'd say focus on really having a nursery plot where you're able to go ahead and, ensure that you can keep these corms in the ground for a little bit longer and at a higher depth, maybe a little bit lower density, and play around with that and see if that works for you. Otherwise, certainly follow what Victor said and probably get your soil tested, see how nutrition, basically how nutrition is for the plants. And of course, if you need any soil organic matter, things like this will certainly be fruitful.